Perfectionism, it's kind of an absolute thing. It is kind of a black or white thing. You either
Hmm.
do it or you don't do it. So where toxic perfectionism comes in is when you relapse, when you eat a food you shouldn't, whether on purpose or not. Toxic perfectionism comes in after that, where you beat yourself up over it. The shame, the guilt, the embarrassment
Hmm.
around it. It's oppressive psychologically. You're beating yourself up over the mistake that has happened, and that is the worst thing you can do for yourself.
Today, I am pleased to introduce to you my special guest, Brian Baumal. He is a registered psychotherapist in Toronto, Canada, and he is the owner of Aliva Psychotherapy. He got into the field of weight management and food addiction therapy based on his own lived experience with exercise, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. While he has maintained a 100-pound weight loss for almost 14 years, he is most proud of maintaining good health as he nears 60 years old. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Brian. Perfectionism in eating disorder recovery is well established as something to soften. It's something that we talk about often in the eating disorder world. However, in the food addiction recovery world, it's a little different. Um,
Mhm.
we are working with the reality that certain foods don't work for us, and that abstinence can be a very powerful part of healing. And so there's a clarity there, even if for some people it can feel a bit extreme. And yet, another thing that we know about addiction recovery is that slips are part of the process. It almost never happens that that slips aren't that there's just like a clear path to recovery. Slips are oftentimes
Yeah.
part of the process in addiction and recovery, and we know that. But what can often happen is that people turn on themselves. It quickly becomes black and white because we, as food addicts or people with other addictions as well, we tend to be black and white. And so then that familiar belief kicks in like one is too many, 1,000 is never enough, that slogan that we know and that we identify with. And so then we're like, oh, we knew that. Like, so we're extra hard on ourselves. So there is a real tension here in the food addiction realm of we're working with a model that asks for structure, but we're also human and imperfect. And so, what if the goal isn't to never mess up, but to stay with ourselves when we do? Or how do we stay committed without becoming rigid or self-punishing? And so, this is some of the
Mhm.
juicy stuff that we're going to dive into today. I have the pleasure of having Brian Baumel here with me today, and we are going to be discussing this topic. So, Brian, thank you so much for being here with me today.
It is my pleasure. You have set up the conversation perfectly. I mean, you're exactly right. How do people be perfect without being absolutely perfect and oppressively perfect? I will say one thing and get it out of the way. I have talked to food addicts who, when they're imperfect, they say, but when I was told about food addiction, I needed to be perfect, and I'm not perfect. In other
Yeah.
words, I'm dealing with the secondary impact of food addicts, not even though they're doing well, even though they're generally doing well, when they're imperfect, the whole world swallows them whole, so to speak. That has been the subject of therapy for me much more than once with many different people. So there's a lot to unpack about how perfectionism looks and its impact, and I'm looking forward to talking all about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Before we dive in, I would love to hear just like a little bit of a personal story, if it's possible. Like, can you tell us a little bit about you, your background? How did you end up working with eating disorders and food addiction?
Sure. So, in short, I suffered from exercise bulimia, then immediately slipped into binge eating disorder for about 9 years. When I recovered from all of those, I had a small general practice. And also, I did a lot of consulting with my background in psychology. I did a lot of work for pharmaceutical companies, talking to people taking their medications about the psychological aspect of doing so.
Mm.
And I had a bit of a choice. I realized that I had to specialize in one of these areas, to be honest with you. I was doing well in both, but it became clear that both of them had reached a point where I said, I've really got to decide to do one or the other. And I had just a heart to heart conversation with myself. And within 10 minutes, I said, therapist who has overcome two eating disorders, lost weight, pretty permanently, can help you with same issues. Just sort of a marketing story right there, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I can do this. So that was how I got into the area. What I will say is that I didn't even know about eating disorders, let alone food addiction, when I made this decision. I didn't
Mm.
even know I suffered from eating disorders. I didn't even think I overexercised.
Mm.
But what I quickly learned is when I opened up my practice for weight management, I saw a lot of people who would have, body dysmorphia, and they'd come in and they'd say, "Help me lose weight." I'm like, "You don't have to." I mean, I don't want to sound
Hmm.
judgmental, but from a
Yeah.
clinical
Yeah.
point of view,
Yeah.
I realized, from a clinical point and experience point of view, I realized I'm out of my depth. That's where it. So then I had to learn about eating disorders, and then I realized I had an eating disorder, and
Wow.
then food addiction came in by accident, to be honest with you. And I think that's an important point here. They don't teach food addiction and so on and so forth. You don't read about it. You read
Right.
about binge eating disorder, and you think that
Right.
anyone who has issues with volume eating is a binge eater. But just by accident, I became friends with a gentleman by the name of Tony Vasallo here in Toronto. Some people may know him, but he introduced me to Vera Tarmand, who's also in
Ah.
Toronto, and most
Mm-hmm.
people in our community know Vera. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, Tony and Vera, they're very smart, friendly, intelligent people with good followings, good results. And I said, I think I better listen to this food addiction stuff. And then I started incorporating that and now assess people accordingly and treat them
Mm-hmm.
accordingly. And I really find food addiction now one of the easier things to treat if we get the right diagnosis with the right assessment with the right abstinence plan. It has its challenges for sure, but when it clicks, it can go pretty well. So that's
Mm.
a little bit about me.
Thanks for sharing. That's fascinating that you actually didn't even realize that you were that you had eating disorders until you were working with people.
And
That's really incredible.
yeah, yeah. It goes to show you that in some cases, eating disorders aren't that well talked about either.
Especially in males.
Yes, I make a joke that when I go to conferences on eating disorders, when there are bio breaks, I have no problem using the washroom.
So earlier in you were mentioning how perfectionism, how in a way we embrace it in the food
Mhm.
addiction community, and yet there's an extent where it can become really harmful, debilitating, toxic. So what is the difference between perfectionism and toxic perfectionism?
Yeah, and I really like that term, or I really like the differentiation there between perfectionism and toxic perfectionism, because because there's this toxic positivity, and people understand, all right,
Hmm.
there's this positivity, but then there's a point where it goes overboard. And so
Hmm.
we can have perfectionism, but there's a point where it goes overboard
Yeah.
for us. And perfectionism, it's kind of an absolute thing. It is kind of a black or white thing. You either
Hmm.
do it or you don't do it. So where toxic perfectionism comes in is when you relapse, when you eat a food you shouldn't, whether on purpose or not. Toxic perfectionism comes in after that, where you beat yourself up over it. The shame, the guilt, the embarrassment
Hmm.
around it. It's oppressive psychologically. You're beating yourself up over the mistake
Hmm.
that has um, happened, and that is the worst thing you can do for yourself. It is at that point. Look, we can feel sad, we can feel upset, angry, ashamed, whatever the feelings are that come up, that is fine. We do not want to take away a single feeling that comes up from any sort of slip up from abstinence. Where we have to focus on is the thoughts around, okay, I made a mistake. How do I get back on again? And realizing that the thoughts of failure can end after a certain amount of time. The
Hmm.
other thing I will add too is that setting up the recovery around addiction, that is before you actually start the recovery, the abstinence, the provider really needs to make sure this is not about weight. This is not directly about body improvement. Yeah, will you lose weight? Sure. But what we're doing is we are preparing you for a different relationship with food. Because just removing like I would have a lot of people who would say, I screwed up and now I'm going to put on 20 pounds again. Or that's the issue.
Hmm. Hmm.
No, forget about the 20 pound. Please, please. That's the last thing you need to worry about right now.
Hmm.
Let's
Hmm.
focus on just supporting getting you back to where you need to be. The weight, not an issue. And if providers set that up right from the beginning, that this is not about weight, this is about relationship with food,
Hmm.
then that sort of fall into toxicity could be reduced a little bit.
Hmm. I love that. It sounds like a very compassionate approach, encouraging people to stay with their experience, instead of the disconnection and dissociation that is so common in this cycle.
Yeah.
So, how do you, like specifically working with food addicts, how can you help to support them in avoiding that sort of toxic
Right.
perfectionism?
So again, the first thing I mentioned is, this is not like let's take weight right
Yeah.
off the table
Yeah. Hmm.
in all of this. And something that I alluded to very earlier is that people may have been exposed to very rigid diets before. And of
Yes.
course, with food addiction, you may have to get into that. But it's arbitrary things like no sauces, no dressings, no artificial sweeteners, no sprinkles on Sundays. Ridiculous things like that, or only brown flour when there's a full moon. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one thing that I try and do is not make the abstinence arbitrary for for people. Um, So uh, I think that arbitrary food rules like no oil, don't fry in oil. Oh no, that's bad. It's damaging and disempowering. Now, look, if someone has a cholesterol issue, sure, don't fry in oil, don't fry in butter. If there's a medical reason for all of that, if you have to manage your diabetes or manage your sugars, of course, there are things you've got to worry about. But so a lot of people come from that very disempowered background. And so one of the things that I say to them is, I'm here to treat you psychologically. I'm not here to tell you arbitrary food rules. We are going to come up with the food rules on your own, or we're going to do this together. And I say to them, typically, what that looks like is I propose a staged, I guess, staged abstinence, where what I often say to people is I say, do you ever watch Wheel of Fortune? Many people do, some people don't. But in the do you watch it or not?
I don't, but I've seen it in the past. I know
Sure.
what it is.
On the bonus round there, where you have to where there's one contestant trying to guess the phrase, they give people the standard letters that could be used in most phrases. A, S, T, L, N, and E is a vowel. So I start with people. I say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to start you on what are most likely to be the culprit trigger foods, which are processed sugars and processed flours. And I may ask them, I may say, I give them definitions of what those mean for me, and so that we're talking about the same thing. And I may say, have you noticed, for example, that maybe you could eat some kinds of bread that wouldn't trigger you or something like that? So even within those, I would say are the things that don't trigger you. And then we make a decision. Do you want to eliminate it or do you want to keep it? Do you want to keep it in? So I start with the culprits, and then what I say we're going to leave in will be things like sauces. Oils aren't applicable, but if you have ketchup, if you have honey mustard sauce, don't worry about it. If it triggers you, we'll find that out. But don't purge your house of ketchup, mustard, and relish. Don't do it. It's okay. So we then what I say to them is I say, so we're going to leave in sauces. If you feel that you can eat pumpernickel bread, go ahead for now. But we're also going to leave in starches, grains, legumes, nuts, fruits, vegetables. And what we're going to do is for the next number of weeks, we're going to talk once a week for 30 minutes. And all I'm going to ask you is your food noise coming down? Is the volume of food you're eating coming down? Yes or no? Yes or no? And if it comes down after the first attempt at eliminating it, we've solved the problem. We have solved the problem. Now we still monitor. We still monitor everything. We'll monitor for a good couple of weeks or months because we want the food noise to come down. We want the volume to come down, or we want them to at least to be able to avoid their trigger foods. And if the volume isn't coming down, if they still have concerns, then we would say, all right, what about that pumpernickel? Is it time to consider that? Do we need to go to starches and grains as well? Do we need to look at those? And so I generally give each phase about 2 weeks to a month. And then if it doesn't work, we go further and further along. And I've had very, very good success with that. And I would say many people, unfortunately, they do get to the level of having to give up starches and most grains.
Mhm.
Legumes, nuts, fruits, and vegetables. Fruits, some have to give them all up, but some can eat certain ones. But what I've done is that is the power that I've given them. Like we come up with it together, and I think that avoids a lot of the toxicity because I give them a rationale. There is a reason why we're doing these things. Is your volume coming down? Is your food noise coming down? Those are the measures that we use. It's not about weight or anything else. So I hope that answers the question. I think I set it up correctly for people, but I would encourage, I wonder what your thoughts are on how I do this.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I think that's an interesting approach to be in collaboration with the client, with the patient, and try to support them in trying to figure that out themselves, because I think that's a big problem in recovery in general, is that people are trying to follow someone else's meal plan. They're just trying to parrot what someone else is doing, and then it might not work because it might be too severe for them. Maybe they don't need all those rules, or it could be too lax because maybe someone else doesn't have the issues that they do and they need something that is a little tighter, but people don't, you just have to try it for yourself, and you have to develop the skills of being able to tune to yourself, to be able to modify as necessary, and that is what leads to long-term sustainable recovery. But if you
Mhm.
just follow, the plan of someone else, that is hard to develop the just right, the Goldilocks spot for yourself. And so I think it's really interesting what you're saying in supporting people and sort of just starting out with cutting out the processed foods and then going from there. And when they come to you, you guys can review together and you can support them in co-regulating. Like, let's say it didn't go well that iteration the past week or two. And then, instead of you just saying no or, something like that,
Oh,
you're staying calm, asking them, hey, let's just chat about what happened. Did the food noise go up or down? Did the volume go up or down? Let's continue forward with this sort of like scientific mindset, of
I
like,
will.
hey, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to add two other things
Yeah.
to it. First of all, if I tell them, I say, if I ever say no, or if I ever say no sauces, or if I ever say no almonds, I tell them, hang up on me and fire me on the spot. That is not what I'm here to do. The other thing too is you are right. We're teaching them the skills, and I'm looking out for their psychological health in all of this.
Yeah.
That I'm a
Yeah.
psychotherapist. That is
Yeah.
my main concern. If people want targeted, specific nutrition information after I've assessed them and after they've done a certain degree of abstinence and they're wondering if they can eat a certain legume or the amount of protein, so the amount of carbohydrate that would be in certain foods and how many carbohydrates can they exactly eat? Is it 20? Is it 80? Is that net? I mean, I understand. Is it net fiber, total fiber? Refer them to because that's not my specialty. I've done this. I've done the work of having them sort of overcome all the psychological roadblocks. The other thing too in all of this is there's another question I ask, which is critically important. If people slip up, if they make a mistake, I say, and did that lead to a binge? So you had the proverbial honey mustard sauce on your chicken. Oh, you ate it. You ate a chicken. You ate two breaded chicken breasts. You had croutons in your salad. Okay, what happened? Let's experiment with that. In theory, this is likely to cause a relapse, but we have an opportunity. Do you want to try a lot of croutons in your salad and see if it chronically cause or see if it is going to lead to a relapse at what point and at what point? Or do you just want to get rid of the croutons? What do again, what do you want to do? We can experiment with this. The one thing that I do say is that if they don't figure this out, they're going to start playing with fire a little bit. If they think, well, I can have a little bit of crouton, I don't want them thinking I can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that because that's playing with fire. We know that. So that's a firm rule that I put in place, which is let I say let's solve the crouton issue. Let's solve the bread issue because I don't want you playing with fire down the road from any of this. So that's another not yeah, that's another sort of scientific measure that I have is if you made a mistake, what happened?
Hmm.
Both in terms of the volume and the shame and everything. What went on? Let's gather our data and figure out where we go from there.
I like that. I like that sort of a data perspective. It's all data. It's not a reason to beat ourselves up or to relapse for 6 months. It's just data. What can we learn moving forward? Maybe this food item is fine. Maybe it's a no, and just keep moving forward to support recovery.
Mhm.
So if someone does, if there is a negative reaction, then how do you, sounds like you're pretty thoughtful on, how to mitigate shame. So, how do you support a client in reducing this shame and when they're really trying to achieve abstinence or trying to figure out their abstinent plan?
I have a very, very good answer for that. But just sitting right here, right now, I think what I'm feeling is how hard a patient or a client could fall if they get into that shame trap. Like it's not an easy place
Yeah.
to be. Let's start by recognizing that, and let's not even gloss over it a little bit. When I'm dealing with shame outside of a food context, because I deal with depression, anxiety, a lot of the standard stuff other therapists do.
Hmm.
One of the best ways you can deal with shame is be with the patient in the moment of
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah.
And shame is actually caused by others seeing us in a way that we don't like, or the people looking at us don't like. So it's often caused from the outside. So having an outside person sit with it and say, like, yeah, this is incredibly tough for you. Or, I bet 30 years of failure came rushing right back in, and just being very, very empathetic with with it in that moment. And then as we begin to come out of that, I can explain shame a little bit to people, because shame overwrites a part of our personality. And it basically it takes the part that says I'm a good person and it puts in there I'm a bad person. Fundamentally, that's what it does. And then it operates on an unconscious level. It's very much like a computer virus.
Mm.
Once it gets into your computer, its code is overwritten. It's not there to serve Christina's needs anymore. It is there to send all of your financial information to a hacker on the other. And because it's been overwritten, the computer thinks it's doing its job. I, I've been booted up. All right, let's find her information and send it over. That is my job. That is my task. And to you, as the user, it's operating completely out of your awareness. So shame overwrites us, and we don't know what's happening, and we don't know that we're acting on it very much. Shame, when people think my situation is hopeless,
Mm.
that's a lot of shame talking right there. Not necessarily. That's often a lot of shame talking. So I will tell people that shame operates in this kind of way. And then I will say, okay, but that doesn't explain why that doesn't necessarily explain why we feel so bad, or why we want to lose weight quickly, or why we want to get this food addiction solved quickly. I say, here's the reason for that. Because when you go to your next family event, you're sick and tired of that pain in the ass uncle pointing at your stomach and going, hey, they got Ozempic for that now. Why don't you try it? They're sick and tired of people who always say, no, 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 you can't have a second piece of cake. They get tired of being the largest person in the room. Spring is coming up. For those of us in cold climates that get into warm climates, our summer clothes don't fit us anymore. That's the shame that people want gone yesterday. I want my uncle to stop making the comments. And recently, I actually came up with another thing, because a lot of people, say, oh, I want to lose weight for health. But your uncle doesn't know what your blood pressure is. You could achieve a normal blood pressure, still be very heavy, and still have your uncle make the bloody comment to
Yeah.
you. So that's often why health is not a driver. It's because we want these shaming events gone. And
Hmm.
when I tell people that, yes, that's really what I'm wanting to run away from, and I say, you know what we need to do is recognize the fact that shame is creating speed in all of this. Shame is working on an unconscious level, saying that you're not good enough. What we need to do is slow down this process. And yeah, you're going to have to live for maybe 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year, sorting through this food addiction. I will extend it out a little, X time, whatever it is. But I want them to get used to the fact that for a little bit while longer, they're going to have to deal with that crappy uncle. They're going to have to go through another season of having clothes that don't fit them. If I can get them to slow down and accept those feelings of shame, then a lot of stuff goes away. So if you make a mistake in this, that's okay. It's what we're going to do is we're going to trade off short-term weight loss for long-term results by getting rid of your shame. So
Mm.
that is how I tend to do it, and it tends to work. Like I said, I'm there for their psychological health. I'm not there to tell them 70 net grams of carbs a day kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that I like hearing the, hey, can we slow down type of thing. Like it makes me just right now be like, take a breath and take a pause, and I feel like that the whole acceptance piece, it's also distress tolerance because,
Yep.
that's also what it's building is, and that distress tolerance that they're building is such a useful skill that they can use in their whole life to cope with urges to binge or to grab food, dealing with these insensitive comments. And yeah, it's just a really good skill to develop. And I like that you're really trying to say, hey, can we get away from quick fixes or immediate knee-jerk reactions and just try to pause a bit and take a little bit of a longer term perspective to work with you in your process.
I realized again, you commented that isn't it ironic that I didn't even know I had an eating or two eating disorders as I was going through all this. When I was reclaiming my weight, my body, my relationship with food, I actually had that narrative running through my head. I would go to family events and I would say in my head, just wait 6 months. Just wait 6 months. I didn't even know I was doing it, but it's just like
Mm,
just wait. Just wait 6 months and then see if you feel better coming back. Coming back, or see if you just have more comfort coming here. So I think how I work with that shame is proving to be very effective with people.
in real time, if someone's like, oh man, right now, I just slipped, I'm slipping, I just binged, I'm binging, what would be some of the ways that one could, what would be a non-perfectionistic response to that?
Sometimes I offer texting to my patients. I give them the option, and I take that right from the 12-step sort of sponsorship program as a way of helping them through. And the first thing I would determine is, is there any serious risk of either physical or psychological harm? In most cases, there isn't. And then what I would say is I can stay with you virtually as long as I can. That's part of, I mean, they understand that if I'm indisposed, I can't, and they're okay with that. I would say,
Yeah.
I'll message you a couple of times and let's not even try to stop. Like, let's not put the brakes on this. Let's not, that's only going to make things worse. Realize that you're out of control right now and realize that your addict brain is doing its addict thing right now. And what you've done is reached out, which is incredibly positive because many of the addictive eating patterns or any of addictive behavior is often done mindlessly and robotically. So the fact that you've even reached out is a help to you. And I would say, what made you do it? What made you in all of this reach out to to me? And that usually helps. That usually helps people right there because they've realized they've made a step forward, even
Right.
though they're falling back. I'm like, well, you're not, you're not doing it mindlessly now. You are getting a hold, you're getting a hold of me, but let's just let the addict brain do its addict thing with me watching you. And then as we're ready, then we can deconstruct this a little bit. The only thing I want to make sure of is that the intake of the food at that moment does not cause them an immense amount of stress or an immense, like a critical amount of distress or anxiety, which I haven't had happen before. But other than that, I'm just like, I'm here with you. Let's in a little while figure out what's going on, what led to this, and we will get a discussion going for our next appointment. But just even realizing that reaching out is a big, big, big first step. I realize that there may be sponsors out there who say, and Brian, you got to add in this, you got to add in that. Like, yeah, I have not read the sponsor part of the 12 step, and I'm happy if anyone wants to tell me something. But off the top, that's what I would tend to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point is to just kind of acknowledge and celebrate that someone reached out because not only is it not common to have a moment of awareness, but also it's so common to just isolate ourselves so, more and more and just want to pull away after an episode like that. And so it's something worth celebrating when people are actually trying to connect in a moment. And I liked what you said, like, hey, and when we're ready, at the right time, we can deconstruct. Because I sometimes call it like a post-mortem or something. Some people call it the permission to be human, plan, or, there's different ways, different things that people call them, but basically it's like, going back and kind of dissecting and trying to understand what happened. And when I work with clients, it's kind of like, analyzing certain factors like, hey, what were some of the vulnerabilities that might have
Oh yeah.
contributed? Like, were you tired? Were you stressed? Did you have a argument with someone? Or, were you really hungry or whatever it could have been? Because
Yeah.
oftentimes those triggers or circumstances or vulnerabilities will come up again, because our
Oh
lives
yeah.
tend to have habitual sort of patterns. So if you're stressed at work one day, it's possible that the next day or another day you're going to be stressed at work. So to kind of be like, hey, and what could we do, the next time that happens, if it happens, and kind of
Right.
just kind of deconstructing stuff. And then one of the questions that I like to ask at the very end, which I think is speaking to our discussion is kind of like I ask, and what can you do for yourself now to show yourself love and
Yes.
compassion? Because I think that sometimes we go back in the past and we're trying to be like, okay, what freaking happened and how can I not do it again or whatever. But then we kind of fail to think of like, well, how can we take care of ourselves in an extra special way now? Like I need extra love and attention and
Yeah,
niceness right now, you know?
you do exactly. And I work with that with addicts. Like if there is a slip up or if there could be a slip up, that is the time to indulge not indulge in the addiction, but to say, how can I treat myself? What is it I
Yeah.
can do
Massage.
right now? Yeah, exactly. What can I do right now to abate to just sort of treat myself a little special? Because these are private victories that people have. By the way, it's in their head, they're largely dealing with it in their head. They're largely dealing with it in isolation. So anything they can do. And the other thing too about isolation, when I just about every food addict I have, I always ask about the family and the support as well for them. And I mention this because those that have supportive spouses or partners or families, one option in all of this, as they're getting better, one way of dealing with this is, did you tell your partner about this? Did you tell did you get try and get, assuming they weren't, assuming the partner wasn't the cause, but can
Right.
you get support from them? Would it be beneficial for you to tell your partner that you slipped up? If the supportive relationship is
Right.
there with the partner, what would it, or even just the thought of what would it be like to tell them
Yeah,
about this? So yeah, there are lots of ways to sort of help people from that difficult part. And again, recognizing that by reaching out, they are treating themselves.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about how we acknowledge in food addiction recovery, we tend to be perfectionistic. We are embracing that as our nature and really trying to work with it. But we don't want it to lead to the abstinence violation effect, which maybe some people who are listening or watching don't know what it is. It's the F it effect, like I messed up a little bit, then I should just definitely I ate one bite of donut. I definitely need to eat 10. So we were talking about how can we understand our drive for perfection and but also give ourselves grace, flexibility, and forgiveness. So the good enough, which is really hard for us food addicts to embrace, in eating disorder recovery circle, I think the good enough and that is a little bit more understood, but in food addiction recovery, I don't think we talk enough about good enough because that's kind of like a foreign concept. So, what beliefs have to change for someone to accept good enough as powerful in food addiction recovery?
Well, yeah. So, there are a number of things there. We can't totally avoid our trigger foods, and most food addicts realize this. You will be offered many donuts in your life. People now tend to know, oh, Bob's an alcoholic. Don't offer him this, or maybe we'll invite Bob, and hell, we may even have a special drinking area or something like that. So we have to recognize that that we are living in an environment where we pretty much have to be good enough. Another thing too that I have found is that one of my food addicts said to me, said, I conceptualize my food addiction as a sleeping bear or a sleeping dragon. And it's not that I'm powerless over it. I have the power not to poke it, though. And I have to recognize that if I do poke it, it has awesome, awesome power over me. And that puts the decision back in the hands of the person. Do I poke it? Do I have a bit of a donut?
Mm,
Okay, I survived it. Okay, I'm all right. Or I did it and there's a consequence from it. And that's all there is. There's just a consequence from it. It's not that you're powerless. It's not that you're always an addict. It's not that you're flawed. It's that you made a decision and you know there will be a consequence from it. And we can get you back on track, and just realizing the power of that food addiction, and that it's not something to be played with, but by human nature we're going to keep trying every now and again. We really are, or we're going to be tempted quite a bit, and that's okay. The other thing too, as well, which we haven't touched on, is we can set very strict guidelines for how we eat as well, too, right? Like there's some people who will weigh their food. There are some people who will only eat at certain times, in certain places as well. That leans into the perfectionism even more, but it's being done for a purpose as well. Again, um, I haven't had to go this route with people, but I could say, you know what? Let's try controlling your eating and let's time it, let's weigh it, let's whatever. And then I would say, all right, did eating at the kitchen table reduce your food volume? Did it reduce your food noise? Did it solve the problem? Like let's understand it may solve the problem, it may not solve the problem. These are things that you may have to keep evolving over time. You may start without building food rules into you, but you may have to realize, damn it, my uncle always serves these bloody donuts no matter how hard I tell him not to. I may not have to go. In the eating disorder world, if I ever said that, they'd hang me right there. But this is a bit different than that. I have actually had more than one patient. I've had one patient book an emergency appointment, but more than one patient talk about, Brian, I am going to my aunt's house. My aunt serves the best cake or whatever. I can't eat it. How do I talk to her about it? It is within your right to do all of that. You don't have to white knuckle it through an event. There will
Hmm.
be times where you have to do that for sure, but there are some times where you could ask someone not to make it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So those are some ways that we can both accept that we are good enough and also realize that we continually have to evolve
Hmm.
in this as well. And when we slip up, just what do we learn from the mistake? What is the data that we can gather
Yeah,
from it? And don't let shame overwrite your code.
I love that. Thank you so much. It has
Mhm.
been wonderful to chat with you today, Brian. Is there any last message you want to share or someplace you want to refer people, like a website or anything?
Sure. I can. There are a couple of websites that I would recommend. Obviously, my own. If you live in Canada, I'm happy to talk to you. It is Aliva, Aliva psychotherapy.com, or just search my name, Brian with an I, Baumal, spelled Baumal. I would also recommend the Food Addiction Institute's website as well. They are a wealth of information for the general public and for practitioners too. There are some very good books and podcasts as well out there, and I can name some of them if you want, but I would just say to people to find a podcast where the person is credentialed in their field and is well educated in their field, and doesn't preach from like, well, this worked for me, so I'm going to start up a podcast and it's going to work for everyone, kind of thing. So there are lots of good resources. The Food Addiction Institute certainly has is a good place to start with them.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise with me today.
It is my absolute pleasure. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and anything else I can do, just let me know.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.